So tonight it's time to finally answer the question, which of the most awesome unobtainiums of all times of our mess culture is the ultimate unobtainium? The answer is, of course, they all are. They all are absolutely awesome in their own ways, and since they are all imaginary materials, we cannot seriously compare them. Except, maybe, we can compare them in how close they are to the reality, according to real science. That is exactly what I'm gonna do, using my science fiction hardness tier list and stuff from 2 previous videos on Unobtainium, which I highly recommend you to see before you proceed with this one, but if you don't wanna, well, what the hell, let's get started. In the first video, we have already figured the main types of spice melange. It grants mental superpowers and triples the lifespan, and thus counts as psionium and immortalium. With its role in Dune world building, spice is also certainly luxurium, as well as it is mutatium, given the blue eye thing and whatever it does to the wretched space navigators. It is not very scientifically realistic for unobtainium to have more than 3 subtypes, but in case of spice melange, one of them is luxurium, which doesn't add or subtract anything to the scientific hardness rating, so we are kinda still good here. What makes it even better for spice is that all 3 of its main types kinda work in the same dimension. Immortalium, psionium and mutatium are all organism related and tend to be organic substances. In case you are unfamiliar with where spice melange comes from and you don't like spoilers, you can scroll this video a bit further, and if you still wanna know, well, it is a byproduct of Arrakis kaiju worm life cycle, so it is very much organic. That is, however, where scientific hardness of spice stumbles upon some problems. Giant alien worms that had to evolve on arid desert planet will probably have a very different chemistry compared to Homo sapiens from Earth. Organic substance that is not just compatible with human organism, but is also as beneficial for it as spice is, has to possess a very complex and probably pre-designed structure. It should be carbon-based to interact with our biochemistry, and it should be very specialized, like some sort of enzyme and/or nucleic acid. For spice, we cannot exclude the first part. As far as we know chemistry and biology, carbon-based might be one of the most comfortable, if not the only way for life to be. However, being so super specialized for interaction with life form from a different planet without any previous evolutionary coexistence, I'd rate chances of that as very low, even if you are a super badass alien kaiju worm. To be mutatium, spice only needs to be capable of interaction with DNA, which is improbable but not impossible. We cannot absolutely exclude the possibility that sandworms are not only carbon-based but also DNA-coded. However, to be the anti-aging immortalium, spice will need to be that and a whole bunch of other things. It would need to solve many problems of human organism on its many different levels, the problems that evolution and medicine haven't solved so far, which, together with alien origin and added powers of mutatium and superpower psionium, drops immortalium component to the rubber tier. The worst problem of spice melange sci-fi hardness, however, is superpower psionium, which is a generally cake tier unobtainium variety. Spice is known to grant pre-science a somewhat limited ability to see the future and navigate interstellar space, which makes it exactly that, superpower psionium. Spice also gives its user improved cognitive abilities and increased awareness, which are both very possible and are known to modern science, mostly from illegal psychotropic substances. In Lynch interpretation, we also see how mutatium component of spice increases the brain of the navigator to probably atone for its immense mental power. But that still doesn't help the fact that brain structure is not in any way adapted to see into future. Nothing is. Seeing future is kinda outside the limits of our control for the foreseeable future. Now, if we count the average, that leaves us with aluminum tier, the science fiction of mediocre hardness below the average, but just slightly, not yet bad enough to be considered weak. Doesn't sound very promising, yeah, but before we jump to conclusions, let's see how the other unobtainiums will do. For example, unobtainium from Avatar. We have already established that it is expected to be room temperature superconductor, and that these pressures can be as hard as ruby tier, which is a good start. So what exactly is Cameron's unobtainium made of? It's not in the periodic table, so maybe it's one of the super heavy elements we haven't discovered yet? Well, yeah, maybe, but there are some issues with this concept. Most of the last row of the table is actually filled with the elements that we synthesized in the labs, and most of them are known to be very unstable and radioactive, and kinda none of them are known to be good superconductors. The nearest one would be maybe lanthanum decahydride, but it only superconducts under pressure of 150 gigapascals, which is just the half of what we have in planetary core. All in all, it's not hard to notice that new heat-resistant superconductors generally are some recombinations of the atoms of the elements that we already know. They are complex, inorganic synthetic materials, rather than naturally occurring super-heavy radioactive elements from beyond the periodic system. Maybe unobtainium is not an element, you might say, but rather some chemical combination of atoms, a chemical compound like that lanthanum decahydride. Well, then there's no need to mine it. We can probably recreate it in a lab and then in factories, here on Earth. No need to conquer Pandora. So, that lack of place in real-world physics and chemistry brings Cameron's unobtainium at least 2 tiers down, and its problems don't end here. It seems that it also doesn't really function properly in economic, industrial, and military terms. We know that the root of the conflict is a huge deposit of unobtainium under the sacred tree of Na'vi, but we also get to see this: the Hallelujah Mountains, which levitate because of the room temperature superconductor hovering ability. In other words, these goddamn rocks are goddamn rich in the metal that greedy humans seek. Maybe not as rich as Na'vi tree deposit, but nevertheless much more easily accessible. I mean, you probably don't even really have to mine it there. Just shoot the floaty rocks with all your mighty cannons and then sift through the wreckage. 10 to 15% unobtainium guaranteed. To say something good about Cameron's unobtainium, it is valuable primarily as energium. We get to know that it is needed to solve energy crises on Earth, and that is what room temperature superconductors can do exactly. However, room temperature superconductors are good not just at making energy cheap and making stuff hover. First of all, superconductors are digitronium, and I see a huge missed opportunity of world building here. Avatar should have had much more artificial intellects, drones, and robots than we were shown. At the very least, unobtainium could have been a crucial hardware component of the Avatar Link technology, which would open some interesting plot opportunities, but nope, we got none of that. We see holographic graphonium everywhere, yup, but none of the vehicles seem to be self-piloting, which is ridiculous even in our day and age. The final destination of Cameron's unobtainium thus will be aluminum tier, the same place where Spice Melange ended, not hard, not soft, somewhere in between, but closer to soft sci-fi. Cameron's unobtainium might look like a solid piece of metal, but it lacks basic science passport and registration. It doesn't do its main job, but it is still somewhat representative of room temperature superconductors, at least as a concept, in terms of being hovering transport helium and energium. The next substance on our list is Vibranium from MCU. It is known to be the material that Captain America's shield is made of, as well as most of weapons and armor in Wakanda. Wakanda is located in a lucky place that got hit by a meteor rich in vibranium in ancient times, so a whole country flourished around it. Is that theoretically possible? Well, maybe. The rule about that the heavier are the elements, the more they are short-lived and radioactive, has some exceptions. There are expected to be some periodic islands of stability beyond the limits of known periodic system, the juggernaut clusters of protons and neutrons that are both incredibly heavy and surprisingly stable. And while we don't have them anywhere around and can't synthesize them for now, they very much can exist somewhere out there and could have as well landed with a chunk of space rock on our planet, and why not in Africa? Super heavy metal can be a good durabilium, if mass is not a big issue for you. And durabilium, as we've established, is highly possible, so things kinda look very good for Vibranium so far. However, not only is Vibranium very durable, but it also happens to be capable to absorb huge amounts of kinetic energy, including sound, which, according to my Unobtainium classification, is a form of hand wavium. Where exactly on the tier list does that belong? Do we have some sort of real-life energy-absorbing materials? Well, yeah, we have lots of them. They are commercially produced, and almost all of them are some type of rubber, foam, or sponge variety. Metals are not exactly known to be best absorbents. They will either reflect energy and sound or get destroyed by it, like ceramics, plastic, or glass. Sure, we cannot exclude that some super heavy metal might have unexpected energy absorption properties, but physics kinda points in the opposite direction for now. I guess that brings us into quartz tier of still maybe technically possible, but it gets worse. The thing is, the movies themselves don't exactly help to establish and emphasize that property. All of those sounds Cap's shield was expected to absorb. To think about it, Cap could have actually been an overpowered stealth specialist, since, sound-absorbing shield should probably give impressive buff to sneaking at night, but we never see that property getting used. That finally lends energy-absorbent handwavium element of Vibranium into the average iron and glass tier. It is still maybe technically possible, but kinda very unlikely, and in this case also very sloppily played. However, Vibranium is even more than that. Not only is it good for producing weapons and shields, but if it dissipates from the meteorite into the soil, it also starts to influence local flora, causing it to mutate into something known as heart-shaped herb, which produces some psychotropic substance that can mutate human and grant him superpowers as well as a temporary direct line to the wise advice of the ancestors. Okay, so I see 2 mutations in a row here, and none of them makes much sense. What plants can comfortably use and benefit from is limited to the top 4 rows of periodic table, so super heavy element in soil would be an irritant for the plants at best, and realistically speaking, it will probably be poison. Well, you might say, maybe plants do not consume Vibranium, but get instead irradiated into mutating by its very presence nearby. Mutation through radiation is possible, but then I thought we have already established that although it's super heavy, Vibranium is also stable and not radioactive? Otherwise, Cap, I would highly recommend you to cover your manly spheres with a lead-lined jockstrap or something, Anyway, even if the heart-shaped herb had somehow managed to evolve into coexistence with super heavy metal from outer space and started producing some unique psychoactive alkaloid that acts specifically on recently evolved Homo sapiens species, by any sane evolutionary standards, that should have taken much more than just 1,000,000 years, which is when the Vibranium meteorite is believed to have landed. Together with the rest of the problems, that plants plant mutating Vibranium into rubber tier at best. Another mutation in this equation is that psychoactive alkaloid that heart-shaped herb produces. It grants an increase in awareness, agility, and strength, as well as lets you talk to a deceased person that was important to you. And all that is nice and all, but it is important to remember that even good drugs are not forever, and that generally drugs are bad. In reality, even if the drink could have caused the expected changes, ancestor meeting would be just a hallucination, and the physical effect should have worn off in a day or 2, week at the very best, as well as call it afterglow or hangover, but there should have been some consequences. As an alternative, possibly, Black Panther could have started drinking heart-shaped herb potion on a regular basis and become addicted to it.
Sweet skooma.
He and or she would then need to constantly refill the blood concentration of heart-shaped herb alkaloid, as well as suffer through occasional abstinences and or overdoses, and that is totally not what we see in the movies. In short, Vibranium would probably be as crappy in mutating humans as it is in mutating plants around the rubber tier weak sci-fi. Altogether, however, if we count the average of all three Vibranium components, that would land us in quartz tier of firm sci-fi hardness, which makes Vibranium our top tier for now. But there is one more superhero-related contestant left on the list, the Kryptonite, notorious for its ability to weaken Superman. It would be, of course, appropriate to evaluate sci-fi hardness of Kryptonite in conjunction with the thing that it antagonizes, that is, Superman's superpowers. However, I am not going to do that for three reasons. First, I think we all can guess how it's gonna end. Superman's powers are a heavy burden in terms of serious sci-fi, and it would be boring and kinda unfair to leave it like that. Second, full investigation on scientific hardness of Superman is gonna make this video at least twice longer, and it is damn long already. And third, I actually plan to make a tier match review of Avengers vs Justice League in science fiction hardness, like sometime later this year, and Superman is gonna be there for sure. For now, let's just make several bold assumptions, that Superman is a carbon-based super life form which for some reason has some superpowers, and those are very much dependent on Superman's super health, as well as our regular human powers depend on our general health. Be it allergen or poison, but if it harms the organism, it will also harm the powers that this organism possesses. So, can there be some super toxin or super allergen? Unlike the other unobtainiums on the list, Kryptonite doesn't have many subtypes. It is pure antagonium, the super toxin. Antagonium, as we've established, is hypothetically 100% possible, if played correctly. Toxic substances come in all shapes and sizes, from all the origin options. They can be basically anything, and they are possible for basically any species that is at least somewhat alive and has chemistry-based metabolism. So let's speak chemistry once again. First thing we notice here is that Kryptonite obviously doesn't belong anywhere in the periodic system as far as we know it, and if it happens to be one of the undiscovered super heavy elements, it will be either super unstable or, if we are lucky, it might come from the island of stability. If it is unstable, it is gonna be very radioactive, which could very much look like your regular Kryptonite radiation effect, but probably without the green glow. There are, however, two serious problems here. First of all, super heavy unstable elements are terribly short-lived. We speak like fractions of seconds here, so Kryptonite would probably never even make it to the battlefield, and even if it did, its fleeting existence would cause little to no effect. What Lex Luthor would really want then is not the ephemeral Kryptonite, but some particle accelerator gun that produces Kryptonite where it shoots. The second issue of this whole concept is that radiation of decaying unstable super heavy elements would be just as deadly, or maybe even deadlier for humans than it is for Kryptonians, which is what we are never shown. On the other hand, if Kryptonite comes from the island of stability, it might be not radioactive at all, and if it is, its radiation will be weak and still as harmful to Kryptonians as it is to people as it would be to any living species that didn't evolve in a radioactive wasteland. Super heavy element Kryptonite also has origin issues. It is known to be created during the destruction of Superman's homeworld Krypton, and planetary core powers are just not enough for creating that type of matter. To get super heavy elements, we need events on the scale of supernovae explosions or neutron star mergers, which is far beyond the weight tier of planets. So yeah, super heavy elements kinda don't look like Kryptonite candidates at all. Luckily, there might be another, much more feasible explanation. It is actually in the name itself. It's not kryptonium like helium or uranium, but rather kryptonite, as in malachite or azurite, so we might be dealing with some crystal type of mineral here. The sheer variety of all possible chemical compounds far exceeds what is currently known to our chemists, which they openly admit, and quite a lot of those compounds happen to have stable crystalline structure. Crystals generally form as a result of magma being under intense pressure, or erupting through planetary crust, or getting exposed to ages of environment, which could all hypothetically occurred during and after the planetary core explosion of Krypton. Some crystals are also known to be radioactive. There's a bunch of uranium compounds that look pretty and can give you cancer. But even if crystal kryptonite is not radioactive, as many other crystals, it can be brittle and crumble into tiny particles, producing dust, which can easily get into lungs and make whoever breathed it feel very ill. As a bonus, crystal kryptonite could really produce at least some luminescence, if not glow, as many crystals do. My main issue with crystalline toxic kryptonite is its astonishing abundance in DC universe. Krypton-type planets might have very well existed in the Milky Way galaxy somewhere not so far from us and stopped existing just very recently, before we made telescopes good enough to even see them. Okay then, it means that Krypton is at the very least several light years away from Earth, which is where the nearest other star systems are. Now try to imagine Earth-sized or even bigger planet exploding and dispersing into the sphere with a radius of 4 light years. I am no astrophysicist, but even the biggest of non-gas giant planets distributed over such an area become a mere speckles of dust. In the best case scenario, or in the worst case for Superman, it might have been a huge asteroid of kryptonite that survived planetary explosion relatively unscathed and for some reason got hurled directly into the solar system. In practice, however, kryptonite is such a commonplace in DC installments that it kinda makes you feel that Earth gets showered with Krypton leftover meteors on a daily basis. It seems like almost anyone who wants to deal with Superman can somehow lay his hands on some kryptonite these days. Even despite that flaw, I would still leave crystal kryptonite in at least Ruby tier of sci-fi hardness, but with two important clauses. We rate it separately from the Superman's powers, and we speak of only what we have been shown on the big screen. What's out there beyond that, you might ask? Oh, you will be surprised. In the extended comic book and animation series lore, besides the orthodox green kryptonite, there are red and gold varieties, as well as white, silver, pink, turquoise, periwinkle. The basic wiki article actually has almost 30 different kryptonite derivatives, each of them with its own special, unique powers, ranging in all shades of antagonium, destructium, psionium, and handwaviums of innumerable varieties. Now that is exactly what I talked about in the previous video, when Unobtainium wants to be too many things at once and fails into cake tier, and well, comic book kryptonite collection is probably the best possible example of that. We of course cannot exclude that we can synthesize some crystal analogs in a lab, that we can. But we could never possibly expect such a variety of effects from just a single group of substances. To be fair, comic book Vibranium also has curious varieties, but they don't make up a menagerie that bad and could probably rank at least rubber. So there we have it, the tier list of the 4 chosen Unobtainiums. Comic books are the worst, then slightly below average we have Spice Melange and Cameron's Unobtainium, then slightly above average we have Vibranium, and on the very top, in the Ruby hardness tier, we unexpectedly have Crystal Kryptonite, which makes it the most possible one. And in my opinion, that's good. I mean, it is of course very nice if a hypothetical Kryptonian boy grows in a rural family to become Superman, but comics and series themselves offer lots of alternatives, and in such a case we might need to somehow defend ourselves from it or even kill it, and if kryptonite is at least hypothetically possible, that's surely good news in that case. Initially I planned to review much more Unobtainiums, but even these 4 made up for a longer video than I expected. expected. Some subscribers offered me curious options such as red matter from Star Trek, FEV from Fallout, and energon from Transformers, and I might actually do an episode on them sometime in the future, as well as I am still open to the new ideas in the comments. Soon after I released the previous video, just before the new year 2024, my channel grew to 100 subscribers, and that really made my day. I know that's just a grain of sand on the general scale of YouTube, but I see that whole project becoming something bigger with time, and thank you all guys for subscribing. I hope I won't disappoint. So, see you in the next video!